Hey you guys, today I want to share with you a technique of using these distress markers. I am no expert, okay? I'm not a watercolor person. I, quite frankly, don't have that skill. So don't see me as an expert, but I had a lot of people, when I shared my card yesterday on my flower, I had a lot of people send me some messages saying that they would really love to see me use these pens. Now, I want to show you that I just put the card here for a reference so you could see, and there is a video of a walkthrough of this card. If you want to look at it, go check that out. But this is a dress form. I guess Clear Stamp is who makes it, or Cling Stamp or something. This dress form I painted with these watercolor pencils. This was the first item that I actually painted with them. I said pencils, I mean distress markers. The thing that I noticed when I was doing these, I kind of worked out some of the details of how they all flow and work. Again, if I were a watercolor person, maybe I would know that from the start. So I'm just playing around. One thing I want to show you in this video, and this could get a bit long, but I think it's warranted. One thing that I wanted to show you about these markers is I bought them in the set. I got them from Flamingo Scraps. They were having a pre-sale. And the thing I like about it is if you buy the full set, it comes in this container for easy storage. Tim says they do not have to be stored in any direction. You can have them stored tall or you can lay them flat. It does not matter either way. But the lid has been designed as a hexagon so that when you lay them flat, they don't roll all over the place, which I love. So, love the storage container. The pens come in all 36 colors of distress plus picket fence, so you get 37 markers in this set. They retail for around $150 for the set, I believe. Flamingo Scraps was running a special on them for like $89, so I was really excited about that. They have a brush tip and then they have a fine tip. The fine tip on the picket fence is felt, because it is a pigment-based ink, so it has to have the felt to be able to run through. The brush end is also felt. Love it. It does not contaminate, and if you do happen to get something on your white marker like I have, you can easily just wipe it off on your mat and it will come right off. We'll get into more of what the white does when we use the white, but on any of the other colors, the brush tip, again, you have this nice fine tip felt end. These markers have a plastic nib for the fine tip, which gives you an even finer detail, and I love the fact that it's plastic. Since these pens are not like traditional watercolor pens. So if you are used to Tombows watercolor or Prisma or whoever makes them, these pens do not act the same way because the ink that is inside these pens is distress. It is not normal dye-based ink. It is a dye base, but it has the qualities of distress, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we're using them. But please keep in mind, if you are a watercolor expert, you will either love these pens or you may have to work with them, because it's one of those things where distress is not typical watercolor ink. So let's get started. I want to show you a couple of samples that I have here. The first is, I had several different types of paper in my stash, and I want to show you how they reacted using the same technique on all of these papers. I want to show you side-by-side comparison. This is Strathmore Bristol Smooth paper. It is not designed for watercoloring in any way. It is designed more for acrylic paints. But I used it. Notice the wicking that came out. I don't think you can avoid the wicking in watercolor just by the nature of what it is. I did not like the Strathmore paper because when the paper got wet, it kind of ragged up just a little bit. So it has a rough texture to it, and I just didn't like the quality of that. But there's that paper. This is the Ranger paper. And this is the suggested Ranger stamping paper that Tim makes. A couple of things about it. It has a grayish undertone. It's a slick surface just like your Gina K papers are. I like the fact that it's designed to, your stamped image is very smooth on this, and I also like the fact that when you're coloring, you can control the color just a little bit better. Because it's a slick surface, the water doesn't absorb into the paper, so refined a couple of techniques to help keep it from wicking out too badly. You want to make sure that your brushes that you use don't dump too much water. You want to be a little light-handed with them. So there's that paper versus this paper. Notice how it's a lot smoother. Even though it bled out, it isn't wicked. It's not you know, it's not porous paper, so it doesn't it's more of a smooth when it flows out of the lines. This is Georgia Pacific white paper. Did not like it at all in any way, shape, or form. Will not use that paper for this. Never. I mean, I don't like how I don't like how the image bled out. All of these images were stamped with archival ink. I don't like how it took my ink off of my it just got too wet, I think, is the big thing. So I did not like that at all. This is the Nina Classic White for Copics. It did pretty much the same thing as the Georgia Pacific paper. See how it lifted the black off of the stamp? Didn't like that. It still has that raggy quality that the Strathmore had. I just didn't care for it. Then we have the standard watercolor paper. Again, it wicked, but it looked okay the way it wicked. And remember that this paper has a texture to it, so the stamped image didn't go on crystal clear anyway, because of the fact that if anyone's ever stamped on watercolor paper, you know that it's not a smooth surface. Therefore, you're not going to get a smooth image. Also notice that this particular watercolor paper had a grayish undertone as well. That affects your color, so keep that in mind. This was cheap watercolor paper from Walmart. If I bought the Bristol watercolor paper, I'm sure I would have a different outcome. So I'll keep that in mind next time I'm in a store and can purchase some of that. Again, look at how vibrant the colors are. Same technique as all of these, but compared to this versus this, look at how vibrant the colors are. So the watercolor paper obviously is designed to handle the water and the moisture. It did wick out around the edges, but that could be controlled from being too heavy-handed. Then on the next one, we have the Gina K paper. This was the closest, the Gina K paper was the closest to the stamping paper from Ranger. I really liked how it was very smooth. The image stayed crisp and clear when I stamped it, so it is a great alternative to the Ranger stamping paper, and I believe it's a little bit less expensive. So that's my review on the different types of paper. And again, these were papers that I happened to have in my stash. I didn't run out and buy extra papers. I haven't tried it on the Ranger glossy paper, because I don't own any. So that would be another option. I know I've seen Tim demo it on the glossy paper. But again, it would have the same slick surface as the Gina K. So for today's tutorial, I'm going to use the Ranger paper because I have a small scrap of it. And the image that I'm going to use today is going to be these pansies from Studio G, just simply because it gives you a nice surface for coloring, and it also offers a really good, it's a good clear image that you can easily follow along with. So let me get it off of this backing. Guys, when y'all buy your clear gel stamps, this is just another tip. Always remove them from the clear plastic, and every now and then go through and remove them again, because if they sit on this clear plastic, you are going to rip them trying to get them off, because they just fuse to it over time. So that's just another little tip that I have for you guys. Okay, so I'm just going to use my archival ink again for this. You want, because you're going to be working with water, you want to steer clear of dye-based inks. You want something that's more of a pigment-based ink, something that's more permanent. You could use solvent inks like Stays On, or you could use the pigment oil-based of archival ink. Either one, but you want to use something that is going to be a little more permanent, because you are dealing with water. Another tip for the stamping paper, because it is so slick, you want to stamp your image very softly. You don't need to perform CPR. You just need to make sure that the image is adhered in all places, and you want to gently do this because it will slide on this slick surface. And then you just want to lift it up. Good, crisp, clear image. Now, because this paper is not porous, it is not going to dry immediately. So if you're in a hurry, just hit it with your heat tool. When you turn it to the side, You can tell if it's dry or not because it'll look wet. And then when you can flick it in the light and it looks smooth and imprinted, that's when you know that the image has actually been adhered down. Now, these are pansies, and the cool thing I want to share with you about Distress is the fact that, you know, they are, if I were to color over the center part with the purple and then let it dry completely and come back over it with the mustard yellow, Distress, where it varies from typical watercolor, Distress will color over that color and not contaminate it. Therefore, it replaces the color like you would see with a permanent marker per se. So that's a cool feature of these markers that you don't normally see in watercolor pens. Typical watercolor pens, what would happen is the water would become contaminated and eventually muddy. So keep that in mind. The colors that are inside of these pens are highly concentrated, extremely concentrated. So you have two techniques, or a couple of different techniques that you can use. One, I have my mat here. You can color on your mat and pick the color up with your water brush and put it onto the thing to dilute it just a little bit. You can also just do like you do your watercolor pencils and just color in small amounts, starting with your lighter value and working out. You can also completely color with these inks if you want a truly saturated color. So if you want something that's a little more maybe lighter, then you know, use your mat and water it down and then bring it to the front. Now remember what I said about water. If you're trying to stay contained within an image and lines of image, you want to be very careful how much water you put onto this. I am not really great with these little watercolor pens. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I'm sort of a virgin at it, if you will. So what I like to do sometimes is I'll just put a little bit of water on my mat and use a paintbrush because I can control it a little better. That's another tip for you guys. So the colors that I'm going to work with today is I'm going to take a couple of these greens. I'm going to work with peeled paint and shabby shutters because I want the yellow, I want a two-toned yellowy color on the leaves. And then I'm going to work with Concord Grape as my dark purple color as well as mustard seed. And I may even want to pull out just a hair of this milled lavender. We'll try all of these and see what we come up with. And since these are pansies. And what I like to do is start out with a paper towel nearby, because what we're going to do is as this gets wet, we're going to blot and lift. And when you blot and lift, you're going to remove color from your image. Since this is a slick color, if you were using watercolor paper, I'm not quite sure you'd get the same effect with the same technique. So keep that in mind. So I'm just starting out. I'm going to move this ink out of the way so it's not in my way. I have these colors pulled out. Now, one thing I do want to show you guys before I get started that I think is a super cool feature, and this is again the same paper. I'm just going to pull a little strip of it out. You can take your lighter color, say this mustard yellow, and you can take your dark color, which is Concord Grape, and just color this on your mat. Again, remember, this is concentrated color and you don't need a lot of it. And I'm going to take my brush that is yellow. Now this is a yellow ink. I'm going to show you. This is my original ink color. I'm going to pick this up, this purple color up with this yellow tip. Don't have a heart attack. Watch what happens. Start coloring again and see how that Concord Grape just kind of works into that yellow. But then as I pull out, that yellow comes back to my normal yellow color. How cool is that? Now you don't notice it. Maybe I should use a color like green. Let's try green. This is a dark green. Again, I'm going to pick it up. See how it's green? And see how it starts to blend back to yellow as it comes down? This is a technique you can get some really cool shading with. The cool thing is once you get all of that ink off that tip, the tip goes back to being mustard yellow. How cool is that? So that's one way of doing some shading with some color. Now I'm going to wipe that up before I get it all over everything. Remember, it doesn't take a lot of ink. These pens also have been asked if they are refillable. They are not refillable, but Tim does sell these individually as well. Okay, so let's get started with our pansy color. I like to start with my lightest color and then work my way out to my darkest color. So I'm going to start with my milled lavender because pansies are typically very pale around the tips, and they're very dark. Now, very much like your Copic coloring, you want to start with where you want your highlights and shadows to be. You want to identify those in your image because that's where your darker colors are going to, and your lighter colors are going to come into play to allow you to have that look of shading. And again, I am just putting that little bit of color right around the tips of these pansies because pansies are typically lighter at the outside than they are at the inside of the petal. Okay, so I have that all colored in. Now I'm going to take